Hello, a very, very warm welcome to you. We hope that you have been enjoying the content of the Gita Decoded thus far. Today we will be looking at the synopsis of chapter 3 to see what Sister Denise has to share as far as the entire message contained in this chapter is concerned. Sister Denise, thank you once again for joining us.
Thank you.
Tell me, if I look throughout chapter 3, what I read from verse to verse is that God says to Arjuna, pay attention to your behavior. What you do is important and how you do it is important. Why is this message so important for God's children to hear?
There are 4 subjects that we cover in Raj Yoga as practiced within Brahma Kumaris, and these 4 subjects are Gyan, which is knowledge, and we've been looking at the yoga of knowledge. Yoga, which is meditation, remembrance, concentration, focusing on God. Then the third one is dharana, and dharana is really what we're talking about here. Dharana is connected with dharma, and dharma is translated in a variety of ways concerning religion, concerning duty, concerning also your personal qualities, your virtues, etc. And then comes the 3 qualities which we've been hearing about, the gunas, sattva, rajas, and tamas. Now also there is this word gun, which in Hindi refers to virtues. Every person has been seeded with a number of virtues. Now I think that there is some areas where the way the Gita is written and translated, you would take it in a certain way, and the way that we work with it in the Brahma Kumaris is a little bit more focused on the actual cultivation of personal qualities, personal behavior, because in the Gita that people study, it remains a little bit more theoretical. And whereas what we're trying to do in Brahma Kumaris Raj Yoga is to really make it practical, so that we're really taking personally the idea that you are raising, that God says it makes a difference how you behave.
Now, Sister Denise, given that one of the meanings of the Bhagavad Gita is the magical flute, the flute of knowledge, how can we link the message contained in chapter 1 and chapter 2 to chapter 3, which would be the despondency of Arjuna and the yoga of knowledge? Could you join those dots together with the message contained in chapter 3?
I think that what we have to realize is that the Gita is having all the signs of being an eponymous scripture. This is what we also find in the Manusmriti, which is another very important scripture that talks about exactly how people should behave in this world. Eponymous means that there are a lot of different authors who are coming from a lot of different angles. Their individual names, of course, have disappeared, and the whole thing comes under Shrimad Bhagwad Gita. So what you find is there isn't a continuity in the song, but what you can also say in terms of the analogy to music is in classical music you have what's known as movements. So within the Gita, I think we find the chapters correspond to these movements, and sometimes the same subject is taken but in such a different way that you can discern that this is a different person's take on it. You find in the Gita some aspects are pro the Vedic conceptions and some are anti-Veda. And so you can't be pro and anti at the same time, and yet it is. So we have a lot of paradox even in terms of the structure.
Sister Denise, I note that another common thread throughout chapter 3 is the control of the senses, self-control, self-mastery. There's emphasis on this time and time again, and personally this is a challenge to most people. Why is it so important, and how does this link to human conduct?
When the mind is pulled by the sense perceptions, it's unable to remain focused on God. That is definite. But then the question is, how do you go about bringing the mind close to God? So there are these two strands. One is, the yoga of knowledge, and the other is the yoga of action, karma yoga. Within the practice of Brahma Kumaris Rajyoga, it is understood that if you use your physical organs for doing pure karma, say the idea of the service of the sacrificial fire, the yajna, which also comes into the Gita quite a bit, the fact that you are doing action for God's task, using your body, is itself going to purify your organs of sense. So you can control them by purifying them that way. Then there's another way, which is the matter of understanding in your intellect that you must withdraw from your senses and cause your mind through your will to detach from the sense organs, and then your mind is not pulled, you see. So these are the two ways. You cannot have yoga and be pulled by the sense organs at the same time. And so the effort that is mentioned in the Gita is all about controlling the sense organs. So what we try to do in our practice is to just focus on withdrawing the attention from the sense organs by bringing oneself up to another dimension, which is mentioned like the three worlds. So the dimension of non-matter, which is the dimension where God dwells, which is the dimension where the soul originally dwells, and which is also known as the place of liberation. So if you keep yourself mentally there, then you're able to actually be detached from the sense organs while being in the body and perform karma.
Sister Denise, the term offering to God comes up every now and again. Offering what to God? That I don't understand, what has to be offered, but I gleaned from the pages of this chapter that the word offering is important.
Chapter 3 of the Gita is a Vedic type of chapter of the Gita, in contrast to some of the other chapters which are not. And the Vedas give a lot of importance to ritual, and the ritual must be performed correctly. It has to be performed by Brahmins. Everything has to be according to the instructions, which are all laid out in some of the Vedas. The principle behind offering it is, if I consider myself, this consciousness of I am doing, I am acting, therefore I am actually contaminating the action by my ego. So the way to get across or get over this problem of I, with the consciousness of ego, am doing an action and claiming the consequences of it for my ego satisfaction, is to offer it, you see. So one of the things the Gita is saying is that you have to perform action which is sacrifice. We're performing action which is for God's work. So I'm not saying I am doing it. What we would say is, okay, let me go into soul consciousness. Let me consider myself an instrument of God. so that the energy of God is getting the work done through me, and then I will not claim ownership of the action. You see, this is the practice that we do. And I think this is also what is being spoken about in chapter 3, that if you do an action which is a sacrificial action, that means it's offered to God, you're not saying I'm doing this, but I am doing something. You see, you want to have karma with God. There's this what we call the consciousness of I, or I-ness and my-ness. So possessiveness, this is my work, I have rights to it. You start to look for the results of action. All of this is against the teachings of the Gita, or against the instructions. But then the question is, how do you do action where you're not doing action? How do you do action which is a sacrifice? And so there, in the Gita, it is saying you have to offer it ritualistically. What we do is mentally consider that I am instrument of God for God's work. I'm not going to take any credit for anything. I'm not going to be a show-off. I'm just going to try to keep myself as much out of the way as possible and try to be free from the ego of it.
I notice that the name Janak comes up at the end of chapter 3. What is the significance of this character, and why is he mentioned? Is it he? Is it a male?
Yeah, this is King Janak, who is a very important character in the Ramayana. But it's interesting that he appears in the Gita as well. In the Ramayana, he is the father of Sita, the wife of Ram. He is the Raj Rishi, who is famous as a yogi. Now, he was a king, which means he was a Kshatriya, but also he was a Brahmin. So he shifted caste from being a Kshatriya to a Brahmin. Now, in terms of the caste system, a Brahmin wouldn't be a king, and a Kshatriya wouldn't be a rishi. But Janak is a Raj Rishi, so this combination of the warrior, the priest warrior, or the sage warrior, so that makes him a very extraordinary combination of the spiritual power and the political power in one person. And so he was famous for being a very great king who was also a very great rishi. And normally this combination doesn't occur. So he's a very, very extraordinary man who is exemplary. And this is also something that we would try to emulate, to be in the world, looking after our responsibilities and so on, but with the detachment and this word vairagya, complete disinterest of the rishi. He is, I think, appearing in the Gita because he exemplifies the teachings of the Gita.
The words swadharma and padharma crop up. Could you explain these two concepts? Because something tells me it's very difficult to translate them into English.
Yes, it is, because the concepts are very different from what we're used to in Western civilization. Dharma is ordinarily translated as religion, and in this translation of the Gita is translated as duty. So when you use the word duty, you're talking about what you have to do, what your responsibilities are, and how you have to discharge your responsibilities. Whereas if you take the word swadharma more in terms of your state of being, because we keep on dealing with being and doing. So in Brahmakumaris Rajyoga, we practice the swadharma. The swadharma is you become very conscious of yourself as a spiritual being whose essential quality is peace, and do not go into the consciousness of the body, which is par dharma. the dharma of matter, the dharma of prakriti, is to be in action. And action in the consciousness of matter means that you're under the sway of desire, negative emotions, you see. So to unravel this thing, you practice, my swadharma of the soul is peace. Though I am in the body, which is prakriti, which is par, which is not me, it's other, matter is other than spirit, but I am going to bring the influence of my qualities, my original qualities, to bear as I act through the body without coming under the influence of matter, you see. And the difficulty is that you lose that sense of disconnection from matter while being in matter, and you go into pardharma all the time. So the Gita is saying you have to not do that. People generally interpret it that your caste duty is one, and don't get into anybody else's activity, because that would ruin the choreography of society. If you want to just connect it to the 21st century, I think it's relevant here too. In any kind of group activity or any organization, people really need to know, what am I supposed to be doing and what am I not supposed to be doing? And I think one of the temptations is to get focused on what other people are supposed to do and interfere with them, you see. And the Gita would say, don't do that, that's none of your business.
Yes, so Denise, two other Hindi terms or Sanskrit terms that come up is Karma Yoga and Gyan Yoga. Would you tell us what is your understanding of these two terms and how you use it within your own spiritual practice?
We also talk about Karma Yoga as a practice. So a Rajyogi, primary focus is, I want to be in the consciousness of the soul and in communion with the Supreme Being. That's the first step. And then you come into action in that consciousness. So that would be Karma Yoga. So you're doing karma, but you're in yoga. But in the Gita, it looks at Karma Yoga as an alternative to Gyan Yoga, establishing yourself in connection with the Supreme Being through wisdom, through understanding, through knowledge, and just holding yourself in that state. But as it also says, you can't just live like that, because you're in a body, you have to act. The Gita says you could do this way or you could do that way. Practically speaking, you have to be a Raj Yogi and a Karma Yogi together, because you have moments when you're just being, and then you have to do action. And it keeps switching from being, doing, being, doing. And what we try to do in our practice is to extend the time where we're being, so that you can consolidate that practice and then be perhaps more efficient in the doing, and don't do anything extra, just do what you have to do and then return to being.
Yes, so Denise, if one looks at chapter 3 in its entirety, what is the awareness that one should maintain whilst acting? And the word smrti also comes up in chapter 3. The reader's attention is drawn to your internal processes as these two facilities of the body are busy. So what should one awareness be? Where should it be?
So sometimes smriti is translated as awareness, sometimes as memory. You know, and in Brahmakumaris Rajyoga we often use the term remembrance for yoga. And remembrance means, first of all, I have to remember who I am and what I am. I'm a being who then performs. So I am a doer, but secondarily to being. And this is really the practice to make our being the primary thing and our doing the secondary thing. This is really the continuous effort that has to be done. First be, then do. And then your knowledge will inform what you do, why you do it, how you do it, and for how long you do it. So the idea is to let go as soon as possible. One of the problems that happens, you'll notice in people, sometimes somebody will tell you something and they'll tell you again and again and again. Actually, we only have to say once.
How does chapter 3 advise an individual who is spiritually enlightened as to how they should use their energy in respect of conduct?
It talks about your qualities. And so I think one needs to be very conscious, who am I? What kind of a person am I? I think the Gita is asking us to really be true to ourselves and be conscious of our qualities and come to terms with what we are and who we are, and then proceed into action.
Sister Denise, I noticed that the aspect of selfishness comes up strongly in chapter 3. One actually can't ignore that word because it comes up more than once. How would you say that we're warned against this particular vice? Because to some extent we've all become selfish, haven't we not? Have we not?
Let's look at that particular verse. Okay, in this translation, he whose delight is only in the self, whose satisfaction is in the self, and who is content only in the self, for him the need to act does not exist. This shloka actually is not about selfishness. In the Western civilization...
sorry, can I interject? The word in that shloka, the verse that you just read, self is mentioned 3 times, all in capital letters.
Yes.
Okay. So if it's not selfishness, what is it then?
There are different kinds of moralities. And in the Western civilization, this would be called selfishness, to be egocentric, to be focused on the self. Whereas in the East, this is highly spiritual. This is not at all selfish, but this is much more like self-aware. And I think this is also why the word self is capitalized, you see. Because what the Gita is telling you is you don't need to get involved in what other people are doing. That's their own business. You need to be so aware of yourself and make sure that you're totally taking responsibility for who you are and what you're doing. And that is the key to spiritual practice. There's an expression that we hear in Brahma Kumaris, Swachintan, and then Ishwar Chintan. So what that means is that when you're doing your spiritual practice, the first thing you need to do is be conscious of the self, and we call that soul conscious. And where the self is capitalized, we would say, okay, that's referring to the self as the soul, not the self as body, which is the false self. And only when you're really connected with yourself can you then move to the second step of contemplation of God or the divine.
Sister Denise, I'm glad you brought this up. You see, my interpretation of verse 17 is totally different from yours. And I cannot be alone in my misinterpretation of this verse or any other verse that I read. Would you say that the Bhagavad Gita, Shrimad Bhagwad Gita, is a misunderstood scripture?
I think that it is so extraordinary and so full of possibilities that anyone who studies it develops their own relationship with it. You know, I will have my interpretation of it and the way I will apply it, and is going to be different from another person. And if you look at the big spectrum of the rich tradition of Hindu literature on the subject, you will find that there are many, all of them very, very considered very important and valid interpretations of the Gita, which are very different from each other, very different.
Okay.
So it's a phenomenon, you see, which I think also points to the idea that what the information that's contained in the Gita actually has a divine source, not a human source. And that's why it's so fascinating.
On that note, we have to stop you because we've come to the end of the synopsis of chapter 3. And as you've just heard, brothers and sisters, Sister Denise has taken us through the various terms that are used in chapter 3, what it means, the meaning behind it, the meaning behind the meaning. And as you've heard, that the Gita can be interpreted on more than one level, and one cannot say that this one is right and that one is wrong, but these ideas are presented to you so that you could digest it and see what works for you. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you for the next episode. Take care. Goodbye.